For those of you that don't know me, if you haven't joined us for one of our previous webinars, my name is Martin Daly. I'm the Director of Water Quality Programs for CDRPC, and welcome to today's webinar, a tutorial on the State Historic Preservation Office's Cultural Resource Information System. For those of you that don't know us, CDRPC is a regional planning resource center that serves Albany, Rensselaer, Saratoga, and Schenectady counties. We foster intergovernmental cooperation, communicating, collaborating, and facilitating regional initiatives. We established this webinar series to help planners sharpen their skills and as a vehicle for Planning Board and Zoning Board of Appeals members to obtain their credit hours. Now, Planning Board and Zoning Board of Appeals members are required by state statute to obtain 4 hours of training per year, and municipalities have a wide latitude in defining what training is acceptable for credit. After each webinar in the series, each attendee that registered with an email address will receive an email in lieu of a certificate confirming their attendance, and that email may be submitted to your municipality for consideration of credit. For practicing AICP planners, we have submitted this session for 1 hour of CM credit to the APA. So if you go to the APA website, you'll be able to find this by searching some of the terms related to the title of this webinar. A few housekeeping notes. Our attendees join with video and audio off for security purposes, but this does not mean that you're unable to ask questions. Please use the chat or the ask question functions at the bottom of your screen in the tools function for the Zoom webinar. Please ask questions as you go along. I'll be functioning as kind of a radio DJ, taking those questions and referring them into our panelists today. Our presentations are archived as PDFs. And this session is being recorded, and links to these materials will be on the Eventbrite website from which you used to register for this series. You can also use that website to register for future webinar opportunities and find out what other programs are offering. Today's webinar, as you may have already guessed from seeing the title screen, is a tutorial on the State Historic Preservation Office's Cultural Resource Information System, what we call CRIS. CRIS is an online resource that provides individuals and communities with information and tools to support the preservation and revitalization of New York State's rich heritage and culture. CRIS is an advanced GIS system that provides access to New York State's vast historic and cultural resource database, and now digitizes a number of paper records the state has. It provides users with access to more than 1.5 million pages of digital images, including National Register documents, building and archaeological inventory forms, survey reports, and a wide variety of additional legacy data. In addition, the system serves as an interactive portal for agencies, municipalities, and others who use historic preservation programs such as the State and Federal Income Tax Credits Program for historic properties and the State and National Registers for historic places. And there are many more applications which our presenters are going to walk you through. We are joined today by two SHPO staff, Michael Schifferle, Info Systems Program Coordinator, and Matthew Shepard, MLIS. I'm going to hand things off to Matthew, who started sharing his screen. And thank you for joining our webinar, Matthew. Much appreciated. You may still be unmuted, so if you want to unmute yourself.
I'm unmuted now. Actually, Mike is sharing the screen right now.
So this is Michael. I'm going to actually start the presentation. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for spending some time with us. So I'm not going to belabor this too much, but we are the State Historic Preservation Office, internally referred to as People's Island, and we serve as the administrator for federal and state historic preservation legislation. We are the primary state government office for all historic preservation program, effort, reviews, etc. So what is SHPO? And I won't go too much into this because I'm hoping that all of you have some familiarity with us and maybe have even submitted some projects to us. However, I think it's important to talk a little bit about the organization. We are currently divided into a number of specific units. Community Preservation Services, those are the folks that actually determine what is historic and take a look at the property to make a determination of its eligibility for inclusion on the National Register of Historic Places. We'll talk a little bit more about the National Register program in the future. We also have Technical Preservation Services. Those are the folks that actually determine the impact, the proposed impact of an undertaking on the historic or cultural resources. We've got archaeology, submerged, as well as above ground resources. We also have a historic sites and parks division, and those are the folks that are responsible for things like Fort Niagara, Crown Point, Cralo, Olana, and they provide direct support, technical assistance, and other services to all of those historic sites. And then across sort of all of that is information resources, which sort of links everything through CRIS and maintains the inventory of the historic resources in New York State. So once again, very quickly, 106-1409 in Seekers. So 106, Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966 stated that an agency, when undertaking a project, must take into account the effects or impacts of their actions on historic resources. This is mimicked in Section 1409 of the State Historic Preservation Act from 1988 and the State Environmental Quality Review Act. So we review all of these statutory projects, and really the only difference in the review is the language to some degree. And so what projects does SHPO involve themselves with? Any undertaking at the state or federal or local level that has construction, funding, permits, or licenses from a state or federal agency. So in my day, that could have been an FCC cell tower, a state ed department school playground expansion, any number of activities. We review over 8,000 projects a year currently. And so this is pretty much what our shop looked like. Our review process was very paper-based. It was very laborious. It was a mail-in process, and the review was a linear one. And so what I mean by a linear review is that when your project was sent to us, it had to start at support staff, be logged into our system, and then make its way through the office through individual units. So archaeology would look at the project, then survey would look at the project, then National Register would look at the project, on. And at the end of that process, it would go back to support staff. And so it took every bit of 30 days to review a project. And it was slightly frustrating for folks because any point during that time or after that 30 days had lapsed, you would start to call around and we would then begin to look at, well, where is the project? We didn't know necessarily where it was, whose desk it was, what point the review was at. We certainly hadn't provided the applicants with any feedback at this point. And so CRIS changed all of that in that now we do a concurrent review. The submission hits the inbox, everyone's reviewing the project at the same time. And you're also getting feedback right away on the undertaking. So thank you very much for submitting your project. Your project has been assigned this review number. This is the reviewer. And then the various benchmarks or milestones throughout the consultation project, you're getting that direct feedback from us via email. And so all this paper, 1.5 to 2 million pages, we had to digitize. And it's important to understand that the CRIS initiative, when we developed the CRIS application, in 2014. We actually launched it in 2015, but it was actually two projects. It was the creation of this custom application, if you will. There was no off-the-shelf solution that did what we needed to do, but it was also the conversion and the migration of all this legacy data, all this paper that we had at the Historic Preservation Office at People's Island. And so very laborious as well, because folks, consultants, no matter where they were in the state, would have to make the journey out to Waterford to access this material, which was very difficult to get at even if you were here. I'll recall one project, the Millennium Pipeline, natural gas gathering pipeline that went from the shores of Lake Erie to Montauk. It was not a state consultant, and they actually had to take an apartment in Troy for 3 months to complete the SHPO review because they were in our office every day trying to look at the materials, access the inventory materials. And so SINCS was our previous iteration. State Preservation Historic Information Network was the acronym there. And we went to the Cultural Resource Information System. And so once again, it's that old technology, this DOS-based solution to a state-of-the-art enterprise geodatabase. We had individual modules, which I'll gloss over very quickly, to a fully integrated solution. We also had standalone paper maps. So 968 quad maps, USGS quadrangles for New York State, lots and lots of paper. For the denser areas of the state, urban areas, Buffalo, Syracuse, Rochester, Albany, Binghamton, Because there was so much data and so much information, there were multiple quads for individual places. So the city of Albany, for example, there were 6 or 7 quad maps just because I couldn't put any more information in the collars of those quad maps. I would literally put a dot on a map and draw a line out to the collar and write an index number. Obviously terribly inaccurate as well. Absolute scale 1 in 24,000, relative scale 1 inch equals 2,000 feet. Not very accurate at all. GIS, I won't tote the accolades of GIS, but the scale there is 1 to 1. We talked a little bit about those paper submissions going to digital submissions, and now everything is online. So we're asking, while we do still accept paper submissions, we really encourage folks to send in things to us electronically. And I'll let Matthew talk a little bit about that in the future, about sending things in. And it is this instantaneous feedback that you're getting from us, these communications that are real time. And it really constricted our review process time from 30 days down to, you're going to hear from us probably 5, 6, 7 days at this point, even with COVID. And I won't belabor COVID too much, but because of the CRIS application, we have been able to enjoy a continuity of operations that we never would have in the past. Our resiliency is really through the roof because of our ability to leverage the CRIS application. We also leverage some very secure privileges and integration with NYSgov. We'll talk a little bit more about that as well as Esri's AGOL ArcGIS Online environment, which we use for some of our applications as well as our mobile applications. Talked about the conversion of paper files, approximately 1.5 to 2 million pages converted. Oh, and then I'll just go back to a note about the privileges as well. Because we maintain an archaeological inventory that is not subject to FOIL, that is a sensitive data set and enjoys its own level of privileges and authentication. So if professional archaeologists need access to the archaeological inventory, they make formal application to us offline, and then we on the back end, if approved, can grant them archaeological privileges, which will allow them to interact with the archaeological inventory. So that would include the archaeological sites, as well as all those archaeological surveys that have been done. And once again, sort of brought all these despondent paper sources together, thousands of photographs, tens of thousands of slides, 40 or 50,000 archaeological survey reports. Everything got digitized and uploaded into CRIS where it needed to be in a spatial fashion, which is really, really powerful tool. And so I'm going to walk very quickly through our old stuff just to show you the contrast. So this was our first web presence, and you have the ability to get into some basic applications. So this was that Sphinx application, strictly tabular data, a little bit of information about some resources, but not terribly helpful. We had our site number, we had a level of determination, whether or not it's considered to be eligible for inclusion on the National Register. And then, was it a building? Was it a structure? Was it an object? So on and so forth. Very basic information. We also had this viewer, which we did scan all National Register nominations, and they were available in a very basic elementary query fashion. Once again, not a lot of functionality here, very static representation of these data sets, but it was a good effort to get the information out there. Some of this stuff, the National Register program at least, can be gotten from the feds, but back then it was even a clunkier process to extract this data from the National Park Service website. And then we had an IMS viewer, Internet Mapping Server. So this is completely generation 1 GIS stuff, right? And so what we're seeing here, this gray shaded amorphous areas, are the archaeological, what we call archaeological sensitive areas. And basically what we did is we threw random offset buffers around the locations of known archaeological resources, and then just merged and dissolved those. Historic and prehistoric archaeological sites enjoyed different buffer values in an attempt to make the model a little more realistic. However, it's not a true model per se, because it's based only on proximity to nearest known archaeological resources. And then the other thing you're seeing here in this screenshot, these red hash marks are actually National Register listings. So this large one where my cursor is, if you can see that, is presumably a National Register district, which may encompass hundreds of properties. And then we've got lots of individuals as well. One distinction between the National Register properties and our other inventory items, buildings, structures, objects, as well as archaeological sites and submerged resources, are delineated in the GIS as points, while National Register listings, while oftentimes linked to tax parcels, are delineated as polygons. And so here's that IMS viewer, right? And so these aren't even USGS quads that we had in the background. These are DOT planimetric maps. Once again, 1:24 scale, very inaccurate. And what you would have to do is in some of these really dense areas, there's no way to discern one feature from another. And so you would have to literally write down this number on the side and then go back to one of those applications and hope that you got a hit. Very, very clunky. We can see from the table of contents, we weren't collecting a whole lot of data back then, so we had our access to National Register listings. And that was about it. Archaeological sensitivity, certified local governments, but really not much else. CRIS is a complete departure from that. All of our inventory items are available in this geodatabase, as we'll see. So what does CRIS support? It's the highest level of data organization. And so what does that mean? So we've got a series of different types of submissions. You most probably are familiar with consultation projects. And so that is that 106, that 1409, those seeker projects that I mentioned. So somebody is asking us for our opinion on your project's potential impact to cultural resources. We also receive a number of independent surveys, and these can be gained in a number of ways. These are academics, these are avocationalists, these are projects that come in through other channels regarding cultural resources at the local level that we need to keep track of as well. Our National Register program, as well as DOEs. So people just sometimes send us photographs of their buildings and want to know whether or not they're eligible for inclusion on the National Register. This becomes more important as we start talking about the tax credit program as well, which I will not get into in this presentation. But one of our marquee programs nowadays is our commercial and our homeowner tax credit programs. One of the criteria for that program is that there needs to be the building or district needs to be National Register listed or eligible. So you need to find that out before you can even apply to the program. We were also able to migrate about 125,000 projects, legacy projects from Sphinx into CRIS. And so while there is little data, these features do exist in the database because it's important to know what went on at a property historically. And did we already review this project? Did we take a look at that culvert replacement 15 years ago? If we have that information, then that really saves us a lot of legwork in the present. So the CRIS database has a number of key elements. It's the projects that we talked about. It's USNs, which stands for Unique Site Number, and I'll get much more into that in the next slide. It's those surveys as well as the National Register listings. We had to scan quite a few pages of stuff, but we also had to index it. So scanning it wasn't simply enough. We had to ensure that it was sitting in its proper place spatially within the database so that when you were looking at a map, panning and zooming, and you clicked on that I tool, that identify tool within the feature, that document or that attribute popped up for you. And it's all GIS, right? Everything is map-based, which is super powerful. And I won't go into the accolades of GIS as I stated. And it's all in a single enterprise-wide geodatabase, super powerful stuff. So what is a unique site number? Exactly. By definition, a USN is any resource that can be nominated to the National Register. So I've talked about this previously. It's buildings, it's structures, it's objects, it's sites, it's districts, it's archaeological resources, and it's submerged resources. Submerged resources typically are shipwrecked, and they differ from archaeological in that they are not terrestrial. Approximately 340,000 of the USNs in our database right now. And the indexing is standardized in that it's a prefix and a suffix. The prefix is a 5-digit standardized key that is county and then municipality. So in this example, 001 is Albany County. 04 might be something like Altamont or Bethlehem, something pretty low. And then just sequentially assign that suffix as 186. So this was the 186th record for that MCD that we pulled out. So buildings, we got about 320,000 of these in the database. One of our biggest challenges was geocoding these points and getting them on good, solid 9/11 addresses. We wanted to ensure there's some standardization here as well. And so that was a challenge for us. We had a lot of legacy addresses, a lot of vanity addresses, addresses that no longer existed, addresses like 3 rods from the intersection of, things that just simply could not be geocoded. And so while we got quite a few, we have since our launch in 2015 spent a great deal of effort and energy to ensure that the rest of those points are where they should be sitting. And it's not an easy job or a simple desktop exercise. However, it is getting easier as more and more resources come online. Once again, very, very limited attributes in those initial building forms, not much. That was the advantage of scanning the inventory forms as well. And so while those forms are linked to the database, not a lot of those attributes are in the database. So typically what you have to do is open an inventory form, one of those legacy inventory forms, and then open the attachment to get, roof material, foundation material, siding, some of the other field notes, observations. Those things were not necessarily brought into the database as fields per se. Archaeosites. So we've got about 20,000 archaeosites in the database. As I indicated, they are all stored as points primarily, regardless of their shape or size. And one of the advantages here was that we already had the Archeo points in GIS at SHPO. In fact, GIS at SHPO was born in archaeology simply because, as I indicated, I just couldn't manage 968 quad maps anymore. It was a matter of necessity. And we talked about archaeological sensitivity and their privileges. Once again, very limited attributes on these legacy ones, but all the forms have been scanned and the data is in there. It's our hope that in the future we will have the capacity to go back to those forms and sort of mine that data out of there and put it where it's supposed to be in the database. Districts, not going to go too deep into the historic districts, hundreds of districts at this point. Districts can encompass, in some instances, thousands of individual buildings. These are stored as polygons, and that's primarily because they are tax parcel based. Once again, as tax parcels have become more easily accessible, particularly at the statewide level, this has been a lot more easy to attain these and to get these ground truth, as it were, or to get these tied to specific tax parcels. Pretty important when you're talking about, particularly when you're talking about eligibility for some of these programs. Am I in a listed district is an important question when you're applying for tax credits. So I'll go very quickly through some screenshots of our inventory just to give you a sense of the scale and magnitude. When I grabbed this screenshot a little while ago, a couple weeks ago, 311,000, a little bit more than that, buildings. These are spatial buildings that are in the GIS database. This excludes those initial ones, which we call non-spatial guys, and those are the ones that we couldn't get good addresses on. I'll point out some general patterns here or observations that may seem obvious to everyone. Archaeological sites and buildings occur where survey has occurred, and survey occurs where development has gone on. And so you'll see really solid coverage down in the city, lower Hudson, really pretty much all the Hudson, capital area. As you get out towards Schenectady, Amsterdam, pretty solid, Syracuse, Rochester, Buffalo, Binghamton, Elmira, Ithaca, a little blip up here in Plattsburgh. Where you'll notice there's an absence is within the blue line. Not a whole lot going on within the Adirondack Park. And that's not because the resources don't exist up there. It's simply because we haven't done the survey work up there. So once again, here's your municipalities, just to kind of show you where that clustering is occurring. And then there's the blue line. So very clear that there's not much going on in there. And so this can inform our decision-making when we talk about where to put our efforts in future surveys. National Register listings. So this caption is actually erroneous. It should say National Register listings rather than buildings, because it does include the districts. And some things to point out here is some of the linear features. So on the east side of the river, parallel is the Parkway. That's what that long guy is. Up in the North Country is the Adirondack Railroad. And then you can sort of see going across the entirety of the state is the enlarged Erie Barge Canal. Obviously huge linear features. This guy right here in Western New York is presumably Letchworth State Park. And you've got some other things popping up here. So pretty good coverage there. And once again, this informs our decision-making in terms of where we put our efforts to survey. There's historic districts everywhere. There's properties everywhere that are eligible for inclusion on the National Register. So we want to be sure that we're getting good, equitable distribution in that way. Archaeological sites, not too surprising that these follow similar patterns, but there's also some other things that are popping out here too. You can see linear sort of features, lines of archaeological sites that have been identified. down here on the South Towns. This is the Southtown Connector, I believe. These typically are federal highway projects where they've surveyed a long linear corridor and as a result have identified many new archaeological resources. That's typically where you get this type of patterning. And then we've got pretty good coverage in all of our state parks as well. So once again, 22,000 sites. A couple things to point out here as well. As you can see up in Lake Ontario, there's a couple sites that look to be in the water. That's actually an island that's up there. And this does not include shipwrecks or what we call submerged resources. That's a different coverage layer. So very quick look at CRIS in a static environment, and then I'll turn it over to Matthew and let him show you what it looks like dynamically. And then also too included in this presentation, which I won't go too much into detail on, is the steps or the processes to actually submit a project to us. So things very quickly that you'll see, this is actually an internal dashboard, a staff dashboard. And so you can log into CRIS as a guest. There are many guests, but we also encourage folks, we more so encourage folks to get an NYSgov username so that they can log into the application and have their own dashboard and have their own metrics, their own projects, their own things that they've seen. So we can see these are primarily all consultation projects, the date they were received, date they were due, whether or not they have buildings or archaeological, and the primary agency. Primary agency is super important for us because that determines which law we review it under. So seeker is obviously self-explanatory. State ed would be 1409 as a state agency. Army is a federal agency, so that would be a section 106 review. At the top here, we see a number of different sort of tabs, and we'll look closer at some of these in following screens. I'm going to talk about the search one in a minute, but this is basically, if I were to click on any of those entities, this is sort of the basic project information that I'm presented with as a SHPA reviewer. I can see where the new project is located. I can see it in relation to existing resources. In this case, I've got two red squares, which indicate to me that there are buildings that have been evaluated within the project area. However, based on their symbology, I can see at a glance that they were determined not eligible for listing. There's a number of archaeological resources nearby, which may mean that I will flag this for an archaeological survey. And I can see some National Register listings nearby as well. So we would probably take a closer look at this. But this is all the information that the applicant enters into the screen. Sorry about that, got a little crazy with my wheel. And one of the advantages to the CRIS application is the sense of crowdsourcing. And so we are no longer taking staff resources to enter this data into a database, but rather relying on the applicants, the public, to enter this information for us, which is a huge advantage because as a staff member, you may be faced any particular day with 20, 30, 40 of these things. And so you're gathering as little or as quick information as possible, as opposed to an applicant who can take your time, save the project, go back into it, add as much detail as necessary to convey your meaning and to get the project across to us. So here's that search page. Matthew will go a little more into this. You can search under a number of criteria. You can look up if you know the project name, the number. If you don't, if you know just the municipality, if you know any other attributes about any of the features, you can do a search a la GIS. And so here's those quad maps digitized. Doesn't look much cleaner than 4 or 5 or 6 quad maps because there's a lot going on here in this municipality. This is obviously the city of Albany. One of the things that I will note here is our table of contents. So look at all the things that we are capturing information on nowadays. We've got buildings, which are the USNs, archaeosites, submerged resources, museum sites, which are a different flavor of archaeological resources. We capture cemeteries, DOT bins, National Register listings, building districts, archaeosurveys, building surveys, consultation projects, and it goes on and on and on. So we're really capturing as much information as we can about a lot of these features and then spinning it up in that one-to-one environment. And so if I wanted to do a deeper dive, I could just scroll in here and dive into any one of these resources and see what's going on. I'm scaled out so you can see that buildings are not present based on the extent here and based on the scale. So these would be all archaeological resources that we're taking a look at here. And then if I was to click on any one of those buildings, this is the screen that I would be presented with. And so this is the park's main office at 625 Broadway in Albany. So you get your spot on your map, you get your representative photo, and then all these other things about it, inventory form, and that is that scan form that I talked about early on. MCDs, minor civil divisions, children. We won't go into that too much, but that is a subordinate resource. Determinations, photographs, attachments, agreements. Is there a covenant on this? Is there a programmatic agreement? Is there an MOU or an MOA? Projects that it's associated with. What projects in the past have we reviewed that have been associated with this? Surveys, on and on. So there's a great deal of information that we can get just at a glance here, which is super powerful. We never had access to this level of information before, and anyone has access to this level of information. And so now I'm going to just dive really quickly and spend a minute or two talking about what our next frontier is for us. And so now that we've got all this data and we've got it available electronically in an enterprise geodatabase, we can really start leveraging it to our advantage. And so one of the things that we did just very recently is we started to build a series of mobile applications to allow us to accomplish survey in the field more readily. This is a screenshot from CRIS Mobile Pro. This is something that I have on my phone, and so whenever I'm in a new municipality and I come across a new resource or a cool building that I think is not in our inventory, I can go to CRIS Mobile Pro and I can zoom into the area and I can see, do we have this building already? Is it a new building? If it is an existing building, I can augment the data. So it's a really powerful tool. And then all that information goes into the CRIS database, but it doesn't go directly into the CRIS database. It still has to be vetted by professional support staff or professional staff, sorry, at the line level. And so what you're seeing here is a screenshot from that application. We rely heavily on Esri's Survey 123 as well as ArcGIS Online, which I indicated previously. And so that's what you see if you're on your phone. You can just snap the X and Y, grab a pick or two, fill out a couple simple attributes, and it gets populated. So that's that version of CRIS Mobile. If I was zoomed in, I could see what was around me. And then this is what gets seen on the inside by our reviewers. So, okay, I've had a number of new resources submitted to us. I need to vet all of those resources to ensure that they meet the criteria and that in fact the reviewer or the survey technician got the attributes right. Is that really a laid stone foundation? Is it dry stone? Is it brick? We want to ensure that the information, the data that we have in the database is authoritative, it's correct data. So another just screenshot of Manager to give you a sense of distribution, and we can dive into any one of these projects at any time and see what survey is going on where. We commission a number of surveys through third parties and through private parties. One of the outcomes of Superstorm Sandy is that we were tasked with surveying all the inundation areas in Long Island and the New York City area, and that yielded several tens of thousands of new resources for us and actually prompted us to develop this mobile application because we knew we didn't want to get paper forms for all of these things. It's just a much simpler, cleaner way to go about things. Once again, just another screenshot from that mobile application. Manager allows us to go in before we consume the data and augment, edit, add any number of attributes that we want to. And so with there, I'm going to leave it and I'm going to turn it over to Matthew, who will talk a little bit more about actually entering data and working with the CRIS database dynamically. So Matt, I'll turn it over to you. And I will stop sharing and hope that you can pick it up.
All right. I've just unmuted my phone. So am I audible? Everything good there?
We can hear you. Yep.
Good. Great. Thank you. All right, so I'm just now sharing, here we go. All right, so right now I'm sharing the CRIS landing page, which is what you would get to if you came into CRIS from the outside. So this begins with a legal disclaimer, which is just basically saying that by going into CRIS and just looking around, you're not actually consulting with us for the purposes of 106 or 1409. If you click I agree, then you're taken to the splash page where you can either sign in with an NY.gov ID account, or you can proceed as a guest, as Mike mentioned earlier. For all of you, if you are planning to submit multiple projects to our office, it really is helpful to you if you create an NY.gov ID account and sign in. Because then you can manage your submissions and your projects from a single dashboard instead of having to copy a code from an email and paste it in and sort of go through hoops to get to your records. Instead, when you sign in, there's a dashboard. So I'll sign in and I'll show you what that looks like. And before I get to that point, I have been asked by various people who work in government or in businesses, you know, I see that NY.gov ID allows you to create a business account or a government account. For the purposes of CRIS, if you don't already have an NY.gov ID account for your professional address, the one that you use for planning, then I recommend creating a personal NY.gov ID account with the email that you would want SHPO to correspond with you. Certain agencies in the state can review and approve applications for government and business accounts, but Parks doesn't have that ability, so we just tell people use the personal option and then use whatever your professional email is. You don't have to wait for us to approve those applications. You basically just create the personal account and activate it, and you can sign into CRIS with it. So to reiterate, I clicked the sign in button, and that took me to this NY.gov ID login screen. So I'm going to log in with my CRIS Help external user account. And that should take a little bit of time here to finish loading. All right. So what is loading right now is what I call the dashboard. It's also known as the home screen in CRIS. And it's got a few key tabs that I'll dwell on for a moment here. The tab that opens by default is My Projects. There's also a My Submissions tab, and I want to distinguish between those two terms. So when you send something to SHPO and it goes into our queue, it's a submission. When we accept an initial submission and start reviewing it, it becomes a project. And then any subsequent submissions that get sent into that and get accepted by SHPO are project submissions. So a project can have multiple submissions. It starts with the initial one, and there's various subsequent ones that can be added to it throughout the life cycle of the project. The default view for this grid is my open projects. So those are projects that are still under review by SHPO. They can also include projects that were reopened, which means that we issued a finding or we closed the project, and then you know, maybe there was a change in the scope of work, or there was additional documentation that needed to be added to the project. So that's why it was reopened to continue review under that same project number. And the project number is one of the columns here. That is our division's identifying number. It's also called the PR number. And that's the unique number for the project that we're reviewing. So I said the default is open projects, but if you have any projects that have already been closed out with a letter, you can go back to them by switching the view to My Closed Projects, which is probably going to be a long list now that I think about it, just because of the way that this is linked. And you know, if you have many closed projects in your past, then that's what's going to happen on here. I'm just going to reload this real quick so it doesn't get stuck loading that long list. All right, so the My Submissions tab, right now it's showing nothing, but this is where you would manage your initial submissions. So if you use your profile to send us an initial consultation submission, it would be in here, and the default is open submissions, which means it's a submission that you created but haven't sent to us, or you sent it to us but you reopened it to edit it but did not resend it. So these are all the submissions of yours that aren't in our processing queue. I don't have any to show right here in this demo, but this is where you can come back in and open up a submission at a later time. So you don't have to do everything in one sitting. You can come back to it at a later time. And then you can also switch the view to completed submissions. So that would be any submissions that are in our processing queue or which we have accepted and processed, or ones that are rejected, but those are pretty rare. That would be, if the submission was just sort of completely botched and couldn't be used at all, which I don't anticipate any of you would have a problem with. There's a few other tabs on here, but I'll gloss over those for now to point out a few other things that are important on the screen. In the upper right corner, there's a few links, and one that I'll point out here is the My Profile link. So after you sign into CRIS for the first time, you can go in and click My Profile, and you have the ability to edit the contact information. When you first log into CRIS, the only information that's copied over from your NY.gov ID account is your first name, your last name, the username, and your email address. But if you fill in the additional information like your address and your phone number, then when you create an initial submission to send to us for a project, by default, you can fill in the profile contact information as the primary contact. So instead of retyping your address and your phone number every time you open up the form, you can click a button and it will fill it in for you based on what's shown on this screen. And then on the right, there's also a way to manage which map layers display by default. But I'm not going to show that because that's a little more detailed than I want to get here. Another link that's also good in here is the help link. So if you click that, it opens up the CRIS online help system in a new tab. So this is sort of a large system that I overhauled a few years ago. And it includes information about the modules that are throughout the system. And it's got lots of cross-reference links. So it's got links to different topics for different pages. There are explanations for various fields you might see in forums or in the search page. And in lots of places where you go throughout CRIS, for example, I'll go to the search page here. There's often a button with a question mark on it, and that will open up the search. That'll open up the help topic for that particular page or tool. So what I wanted to show on the search page is sort of the basic question that I often get from potential applicants for consultation projects, which is how can they check to see if a property is eligible for the National Register or listed on the National Register or near a property that is either eligible or listed. So what I did here is I clicked this search button in the top navigation bar, and it brought me to the search page. The default tab that opens up is the criteria tab. So that's if you know the identifying numbers that SHPO uses for these records, or if you know, say, the name of a particular property. But I'm going to focus on the spatial search because if you're coming into the system and you're just trying to check and see if an address is eligible or listed or near such a property, then this tool is particularly helpful for that. So you can either zoom to a particular county or municipality if you really want to, a wide range, but I'm going to put in an address here to take us to it real quick. So I've typed in 50 101st Street, Troy, New York. If I click the Find Address button, the map zooms to that place, and we see some symbology around here. So the peach areas that display on here, those are National Register listings, and Mike brought that up earlier. So if you see a pink shaded area, then that's your first clue that a particular address is listed on the National Register or the State Register, or both. So if you click that area, the pop-up will show you brief information about it, and you can click the View button to open the record. So if you're trying to locate the nomination form for this listing, you can click the View button, and then in the Attachments tab in this module, there is a list of attachments. One of them is the photo file, which is the photos that were taken and submitted with the nomination, and then there's the form itself. And if I click that, it'll open up the form in a new tab. So then you can, look at that form. So that's how you can look up to see if a property is listed. So the boundary, the peach boundary, is the nomination boundary, and then that may have one or more listed USN. So that this yellow point here represents sort of the cemetery as a whole. If I panned around this cemetery, there would be other yellow points representing various monuments and features of that nomination or of that nominated property. For eligible properties, so these green points that are on the left here, these are eligible buildings. So they're USNs as well, but there is a color code, and that is shown in the drop-down legend here. So if you see a green square, that means that the property there has been determined eligible by SHPO. There's also these purple areas. These are historic districts, and they may be eligible or listed or may not be. These are just records that group together multiple buildings. So if, say, there's a proposed district, which we actually have down here, this is the 8th Ward Historic District in Troy. This has been surveyed, and our office has determined that it's eligible for the state and national registers. So the purple area alone doesn't say that something is eligible. It just says that, there's a record there for a grouping of buildings. I'm going to open up a USN record here. So I clicked the yellow point representing the whole cemetery and clicked the View button. So in a USN record, as Mike showed in a slide earlier, there could be one or more photos. This one has this sort of broad photo taken from what I believe is the Gardner Earl Chapel and Crematorium. There might also be additional attachments like an inventory form, which you can then download and read information about it. If you're investigating a particular property ahead of sending something to us, you can use this to pan around. Alternatively, you can also generate a buffer around a particular location. So like if you put in this address and you wanted to look like 200 feet around it to see what's well, that's a little small, but you can search within that, and it'll tell you what properties or records we have on the map in that area. So I'm going to move along real quick and just give a very concise description of the submission process. So if you're going to send a project to us for 1409 or 106 or Seeker, you would go to the submit page through that top navigation bar and click the consultation button, and that'll open up this dialog, and you can click the start button to launch a new submission form. And here's where you can put in that contact information, and there's a bunch of steps below that. And on the right, there's also a help text for each step. There's also a continue tool here, but if you are signed into CRIS, you don't need to put in a token here and click that button. As I said before, it would be on the dashboard under My Submissions. So I'll stop it there, and if there's any sort of follow-up questions or other questions, Mike and I would be glad to field those.
Yeah, thank you. This is a really useful resource. I had the pleasure of using it to do some analysis post-construction on some sewer infrastructure that was installed at Cohoes that shamefully, admittedly, one of our engineering firms just didn't complete before the project was done. So we had to use the CRIS system to work through that SHPO review process for some of that infrastructure. And it was certainly useful to be able to get an assessment of what archaeological infrastructure or resources were around the immediate area where they did some of their sewer work, and it was very, very useful. I want to just remind folks that if they're looking at projects that are grant funded, this is one of the things that grant may be looking for you to provide feedback on. If you're working with certainly with Environmental Facilities Corporation on some of those projects for sewer and stormwater, you're going to want to go through your SHPO review, because that's going to be a condition of the approval for disbursement of funds for that particular project. So on the municipal side, this is a very critical program to be able to get into and understand what potential impact, if any, your project may have. For folks that are on from local planning boards, if you have a project, you're certainly going to want to look through if there's a seeker review to see if they've gone through the SHPO process to be able to determine if the project is going to affect any archaeological resources. It's certainly a valuable tool to be able to understand how it works, so you can communicate with folks that are performing these assessments. Please use that chat function if you do have any questions. I'll take a moment and provide a little bit more filler and background if folks are typing things in furiously. We do archive the presentations. They are available by video, and they will be posted to that Eventbrite page with which you signed up. So if you missed something or you want to go back through the presentation and view a portion, you can certainly do that. We'll archive the presentation that's static as well on that website, so you'll have access to it. With that, I don't really see any questions in the chat box. I think this is one of those tools that once people get into and start messing around with, if they want to know how it works out, they may have questions at that point. Can you throw up a contact information screen, and that way if folks, or if there's the help section, awesome, you're one step ahead of me. If folks do have questions when they're using this tool page, the CRIS system, they can reach out and be able to communicate with the help area on that site. And you guys are very helpful. And when I was using this system, it's very intuitive, but sometimes you get a square peg in a round hole and you need some help. So I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add that in retrospect.
Hey, Martin, this is Mike. Yeah, I guess I would just add to folks, I try to underscore the notion that if you think you're going to be interacting with CRIS on a regular basis, it really makes good sense to sign up for one of those NYSgov usernames. They're obviously free, and they just afford you a different level of accessibility or functionality that you would get as a guest. You know, you've got your metrics available right there to you in a single sort of snapshot, if you will. And it turns out to be a very helpful tool if you're submitting multiple projects across multiple municipalities and you really need to keep track of things. You know, let CRIS do that for you in an electronic fashion, and it keeps things really in good order.
Well, it's a really fantastic system, and it's great having it all in one place. I can't tell you how useful that is when you're looking through records for a particular site and being able to access it all here, being with it.
Well, and I will offer too that we are currently in the process of undergoing CRIS 2.0 redevelopment cycle, and so it's no small effort. One of the other things that we're doing is continuing to feed the system, and by that I mean we're reaching out and have develop partnerships with all of the regional repositories to get their site information into the files. So for example, on the archaeological front, SUNY Buffalo and SUNY Binghamton and the Rochester Museum and Science Center, just to take some examples from the western part of the state, all maintain individual discrete archaeological databases, and not a lot of that. There is some overlap, but not all of that data is represented in the CRIS application. So it's our goal long-term that CRIS would be a one-stop shop for the entire state, so that all that information, wherever you're working, is available in the same application. Right now, if you're working down in, if you're working in Niagara County, you really need to talk to Buffalo. If you're working in Monroe County, you got to talk to Rochester.
Well, this is a really useful tool, and I want to thank you guys for providing, and sharing your expertise with us for the past hour and navigating through this system. I think it's very helpful for folks if they're thinking about using this system to kind of have a little bit of tutorial time to be able to understand how it works, some of the benefits, and some of the situations where they may need to develop a submission through this system. So I want to thank you both. To Michael and Matthew, and to folks, you can get a copy of this. We'll have a link to this from our Eventbrite page. We'll post it on YouTube for you. So you'll have full access to the presentation.
And please reach out to us with any questions or comments. We're very happy to even provide subsequent training or individual training on an as-needed basis.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right.
And this is Matthew. I'll just put one more note in. I forgot to mention that if you need help that the online help system doesn't provide, each of these help topics does have a link to the CRIS help inbox. It's not a bot, it's me. So that's CRIS
I am the bot it goes to. All right.
Yeah, it's CRIS help at parks.ny.gov.
Awesome. Okay, thank you very much. I hope everybody enjoyed our webinar. We will be back next week continuing our webinar series. Check the Eventbrite page for more details. Bye-bye, everyone.